The crowd sounded like a distant waterfall at cheers, laughter, camera shutters clicking like insects in summer. I stood near the back of the hall, diploma clutched tightly in one hand, the other awkwardly fidgeting with the zipper of my gown. It still felt surreal. After all the years, all the sacrifices, I was finally a college graduate. 38 years old, father of one, husband to a woman I'd once believed would cheer the loudest for me. I should have felt proud, victorious. Instead, I felt cold, forgotten. Around me, families hugged their graduates, parents pressed kisses to foreheads, friends jostled for group photos with giant bouquets and handmade signs. And me? I stood like a misplaced prop in someone else's celebration. The folding chairs up front had long emptied. Most had been claimed by joyful chaos, clapping hands, beaming siblings, proud grandparents with trembling chins. But 2 seats had remained untouched the entire ceremony. I kept glancing at them like they might suddenly fill themselves in if I stared hard enough. One had Myra's name on it. The other, Leona's. I had printed name cards for them myself. Even laminated them. Front row, left aisle, perfect view of the stage. I wanted them to see me walk. To hear my name called and think, that's my husband. That's my dad. But both seats stayed empty. 2 vacant islands in a sea of celebration. By the time I stepped off the stage, clutching the diploma I'd bled for over 4 years of night classes and weekend coursework, the truth had settled in like dust on old furniture. They weren't coming. No missed calls. No texts. Just silence. I told myself maybe there had been traffic. Maybe Leona had a stomach bug. Maybe Mira had a last-minute emergency at work. But I knew better. The last few months had been strained, conversations clipped, evenings silent. I'd chalked it up to stress. To the grind of 2 adults working opposite schedules while raising a kid and keeping the lights on. But maybe, just maybe, Mira had stopped caring about the things that mattered to me. Maybe she never really had. I shifted awkwardly as another group of students passed by, their arms looped around laughing relatives. A young woman I'd taken psych class with gave me a sympathetic smile before turning back to her excited mother. I nodded reflexively, unsure if she'd noticed the 2 empty chairs too. I couldn't tell if it was pity or politeness in her eyes, and I didn't want to linger long enough to find out. For a brief second, I considered asking someone to take a picture of me. Just one. Proof that I had been here. That I had done this. But the thought of forcing a stranger to smile on cue, to pretend we shared some bond of joy, it felt like rubbing salt into a wound. So I walked toward the back, away from the flashes, the claps, the applause that felt borrowed from someone else's life. I didn't have a party waiting at home. No dinner reservation. I'd even bought a card for Leona to give me, left it on the kitchen counter with a pin and a note. Just write anything you want, kiddo. It'll mean the world. I'd hoped it would become a keepsake. Now, I wasn't sure if it had even been touched. The gown felt heavier the longer I wore it, like it was absorbing the weight of my disappointment. I should have taken it off, but I didn't know what to do with my hands without it. It was like a costume I didn't want to shed yet. The last shred of proof that I had accomplished something important. Something real. I watched as another graduate's mother wiped away tears and kissed her son on the cheek. He laughed and pretended to be embarrassed, but the pride on his face was unmistakable. I used to dream about that moment. Myra's eyes lighting up, Leona running into my arms, her little voice shouting, "Daddy, you did it." Instead, I got silence. I tried not to cry. Not here. Not now. I'd promised myself I wouldn't make a scene. I'd learned a long time ago that grown men crying in public makes people uncomfortable. They don't know whether to look away or lean in, and neither response feels good. So I bit the inside of my cheek and focused on the exit sign glowing at the back of the hall. It wasn't bitterness I felt. Not yet. Just something emptier. Like a balloon slowly losing air. I had imagined today as the summit, the final step in a long, grueling climb. But standing there alone, with the scent of flowers and congratulatory perfume in the air, it felt more like a detour into quiet heartbreak. I didn't need a banner. I didn't need confetti or champagne. I just needed them. Their presence. Their faces in the crowd. One look from Mira, one wave from Leona, would have been enough to remind me that this fight was worth it. Instead, all I had was a gown that didn't quite fit right, a diploma slick with sweat from my palms, and 2 chairs I couldn't stop glancing at like a fool waiting for a miracle. I stayed longer than I should have, hoping for what I didn't want to admit, that maybe I was wrong. That maybe they'd show up late and breathless, faces apologetic, arms flung around me with belated joy. But they didn't. And eventually, the crowd began to thin, and the cleanup crew started folding chairs. That's when I realized something deep and sharp. I had shown up for myself, and no one else had. Not today. And maybe that needed to be enough. I was halfway to the exit when I felt it, that soft tap on my shoulder. It was delicate, almost hesitant, like the person behind it wasn't sure they should be interrupting. I turned, expecting to see a fellow graduate or maybe someone handing out pamphlets about alumni services. What I didn't expect was Dean Carolina Whitmore. We'd spoken maybe 3 times in 4 years. Each time was brief, administrative matters, policy clarifications, a nod of approval at an honors luncheon. She had always struck me as sharp, no-nonsense, the kind of woman who wore tailored blazers and didn't waste words. But now, standing there in the thinning crowd with her hand still gently resting on my arm, she looked different. Not formal, not distant, warm. "You're not leaving yet, are you?" she asked, her voice softer than I remembered. There was no clipboard in her hands, no staff member trailing behind her. Just her, and the look in her eyes, a kind of quiet concern I hadn't seen from anyone in a long time. I opened my mouth to lie, to say something like, "Just grabbing a coffee," or "Need to beat traffic," but nothing came out. Not because I didn't have the words, but because she didn't wait for them. "Come with me," she said, already turning slightly, trusting I would follow. And I did. I fell into step behind her, my feet moving before my mind could catch up. We veered away from the main exit and toward a hallway I hadn't paid attention to before. It led behind the stage, past a security door someone held open with their foot as we approached. We entered a quiet corridor lined with old portraits and donor plaques, the kind you only notice when you're alone. "Where are we going?" I asked, not because I was worried, just confused. Carolina smiled faintly but didn't answer. "You'll see." The hallway ended at a small door with a window that had been fogged over with age. She pushed it open and stepped aside to let me enter first. What I found unraveled something tight in my chest. It was a modest reception room. Beige carpet, folding chairs arranged in a loose circle, a small table near the wall with plastic cups, and a tray of cookies that looked homemade. I had expected emptiness. Silence. But the room wasn't empty. And it wasn't silent. Inside were about a dozen people, some I recognized instantly. Professor Delaney from my ethics class looked up from a cup of punch and grinned. "There he is," he said, like I was an old friend finally arriving at a dinner party. A few others nodded, smiling. Dr. Singh, who once stayed late to help me understand a public speaking rubric, lifted her cup in a silent toast. Bethany, the campus librarian, stood beside the snack table, arranging napkins with the same quiet precision she used when shelving books. For a second, I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, blinking. It felt surreal, like I'd stumbled into a memory I didn't recognize as mine. "I told them you might try to leave without saying goodbye," Carolina said from behind me. "We thought you deserved something better than that." I turned to look at her. "Why?" She gave me a look that was hard to interpret at first, half stern, half kind. "Because we noticed," she said plainly. Bethany stepped forward. "You came in every Tuesday night with your daughter. Always said hi. Always polite." She smiled softly. "We saw you." Dr. Singh nodded. "You asked good questions. Even when you looked tired enough to fall asleep in your chair." I didn't know what to say. I had spent so much time feeling like a ghost on campus. A silent commuter. The older guy in the back row who left quickly and submitted his assignments with apologies for formatting. I'd assumed no one remembered me after each semester ended. That I was just another face moving through the system, unnoticed, unremarkable. But they had noticed. I took a hesitant step into the room. The warmth hit me then, not physical, but emotional. Like the opposite of loneliness. I didn't realize how starved I was for it until it hit me all at once. My hand holding the diploma began to tremble slightly. "We didn't want you disappearing into the crowd," Delaney said, gesturing toward a seat. "Not today." I sat. Slowly. Carefully. The chair creaked beneath me, and the moment settled around my shoulders like a blanket I hadn't worn in years. I wasn't just being included. I was being seen. Carolina poured me a cup of punch and handed it to me like it was wine at a communion. "We do this sometimes," she said, "when we think someone might need it." I looked around the room, unsure how to respond. Gratitude tangled with shame in my throat. I wasn't used to receiving without earning, or fighting, or explaining why I was worthy. I didn't know how to sit still and accept kindness that hadn't been negotiated first. "I thought I was the only one who noticed those seats were empty," I muttered. Bethany shook her head. "Empty seats don't go unnoticed. Not when they're meant for someone." The others murmured agreement. A strange tightness gripped my throat. I blinked fast and focused on my cup. No one pressured me to talk. No one asked what had happened. They just made space for me. In that small room, among modest cookies and lukewarm punch, I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Acknowledged. And it meant more than any applause echoing in the hall outside. I stayed quiet for the first few minutes, nursing my punch like it held the answer to a question I didn't know how to ask. The voices in the room blended into a soft hum, the kind of background noise that felt oddly comforting. I kept scanning the faces, people I'd passed in hallways, nodded to in class, or listened to during lectures without ever truly connecting. And yet, they looked at me like I belonged here, like this moment had been carved out with me in mind. Professor Delaney was the first to break the quiet spell. He stood up with a small paper plate in his hand, balancing a limp chocolate chip cookie on it. "You always sat in the second-to-last row," he said with a grin. "Never missed class. Never spoke unless called on. But every time you did, you had the room's full attention." He took a bite and shrugged like he hadn't just sent a jolt through my chest. That stuck with me. I gave him a small nod, unsure how to respond. I had spent years trying not to be noticed. Fitting school between shifts, parenting, and marriage meant I didn't have time for clubs, coffee catch-ups, or campus events. I just wanted to get through it, pass the classes, finish the degree. But now, hearing him speak, I realized something. I hadn't been invisible. I'd just been quiet. Dr. Singh, sitting nearby with a half-eaten granola bar in hand, chimed in next. "I remember that essay you submitted right before midnight," she said, "about public speaking as a form of survival. You emailed me apologizing for the formatting. Said you were writing it on your phone after a warehouse shift. I printed it out and still have it in my drawer." She smiled faintly. It wasn't just well-written. It was lived. That word, lived, hit harder than I expected. I wasn't the best student, not by a long shot. My GPA wasn't going to make headlines. But I had given every assignment everything I had left after the day chewed me up. Sometimes that meant typing responses while sitting in my car in the parking lot at midnight. Other times, it meant recording voice notes while driving so I could remember what to write later. I didn't think anyone saw that part. Apparently, they had. Bethany, the librarian, looked up from her seat across the room. "You brought your daughter in on snow days. She'd curl up by the window while you studied. I used to keep a few extra blankets behind the desk just in case. You didn't know that, did you?" Her eyes sparkled with quiet amusement. Sometimes she'd draw pictures and leave them in the return cart. My lips twitched with the ghost of a smile. I remembered those days. Mira had early shifts and no backup sitter, and Leona had always been good about staying quiet as long as she had crayons. I didn't think anyone noticed the man in the corner reading textbooks while a 10-year-old scribbled cartoons of dragons and stars beside him. But Bethany had. And not only had she seen us, she'd made room for us. "I always thought I was just passing through," I finally said, my voice low. "That I was just another guy trying to finish something late." Carolina leaned forward, hands folded in her lap. "Maybe you were. But that doesn't mean we didn't see how hard you tried. You didn't make noise, but you made impact." The word impact landed with a weight that filled my chest. I wasn't used to being the subject of stories told with affection. At home, my efforts were just expected. Invisible labor. Quiet sacrifice. Mira never asked how classes were going unless it interfered with dinner. Leona, sweet as she was, had started mimicking her mother's disinterest. My assignments and exams existed in a vacuum, completed and submitted in silence, rarely acknowledged. But here, in this tiny reception room with leftover cookies and warm punch, people who barely owed me anything were piecing together the story I hadn't even realized I was telling. A story of perseverance, of showing up, of being there, even when life pulled at every corner. "You know," Delaney said, glancing around, "we don't do this for everyone. Not because we don't care, but because some people never let us in." You did, even without realizing it. I swallowed hard, the words catching somewhere between my throat and my chest. I didn't think anyone was paying attention. Carolina offered a knowing smile. "That's the thing about people who give everything quietly. They often assume no one notices. But some of us do. We make it a point to." A strange mix of gratitude and shame rose in me. Gratitude that they saw me, and shame that I hadn't seen myself. I had spent so long shrinking into corners, trying not to inconvenience anyone, trying not to ask for too much, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be recognized. Not for a grade, not for a favor, but for simply existing with intention. There was no party music, No speeches, no balloon arches. But when Delaney raised his cup again and said, "To the man who taught us what endurance really looks like," the small group echoed him with clinks of plastic and nods that felt far louder than applause ever could. For the first time all day, someone clapped when I walked into a room. And that was enough to stitch something broken back together in me. The laughter had faded into gentle conversation, but the warmth still lingered. It coated the air in that small reception room, softening the walls, making everything feel a little less temporary. I sat there with my empty cup and half a cookie, listening. Not just with my ears, but with something deeper, something I hadn't used in a long time. Maybe trust. Maybe hope. It was hard to name. I had expected that after a few polite congratulations, everyone would drift back into their own lives. That this would be a kind gesture, brief and delicate, something they did to soothe my obvious isolation. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized this wasn't a performance. They weren't humoring me. They knew me. Not the version of me I tried to package and present when I walked into a classroom or submitted an assignment, but the version that existed in between. The version who kept showing up when it would have been easier to quit. Delaney was the first to say it out loud. "You always cleaned up the room after class," he said. "You probably didn't even realize it. But every week, I'd find the chairs pushed in, the whiteboard erased, trash picked up. That wasn't happening in my other sections." He smiled at me. "I used to think you were just polite. But after a while, I realized, it's who you are. You leave things better than you found them." I stared down at the cookie in my hand, unsure how to respond to something that's simple but kind. The kind of thing no one in my own house had said in years. Dr. Singh leaned forward from her spot on the love seat. "And I still remember the night you turned in that essay right under the wire. You emailed me, said you were sorry it wasn't perfect. But you had just gotten off a double shift at the warehouse, and your daughter had a fever, and you were trying to write from your phone in a parking lot." I winced, remembering how ashamed I'd felt sending that email. I'd almost deleted it. I'd assumed she'd roll her eyes, maybe mark it down. Instead, she looked at me now with something like admiration. "You know what I saw?" she asked, gently. Someone who had every reason to give up, but didn't. Bethany chimed in from behind the cookie table. "You never complained. That always struck me. Even when you were clearly exhausted. Even when Leona was curled up in a chair next to your textbooks, and it looked like you hadn't slept in days. You were kind. Always kind." I rubbed my thumb across the edge of my paper cup. I couldn't remember the last time someone used that word to describe me. Kind. Not responsible. Not steady. Not hardworking. Kind. "You think people don't notice that kind of thing," I muttered. "Most don't," Carolina said, her voice soft. "But the right ones do." She wasn't looking at me with pity. None of them were. This wasn't about filling the gap Mira and Leona had left behind in the audience. This wasn't a substitute family offering crumbs of comfort. This was something else entirely, recognition. A quiet honoring of the hours I'd spent in shadow, the dignity I tried to preserve when no one clapped, when no one asked if I was okay. I had spent years waiting for Mira to say what Carolina had just implied, that I mattered, that the way I showed up, even when no one asked me to, meant something. But she never had, and I think I stopped expecting it a long time ago. Maybe that's why today had cut so deep, because part of me had allowed hope back in, just for this one milestone. I guess I didn't realize I was being seen. I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. "I just thought. I had to keep going." "You did," Carolina said. "But you didn't just go through the motions. You poured yourself into this." And we watched. There was a silence after that. Full, not empty. A silence that didn't demand to be filled. They let me sit with it. Let me absorb the truth of it in a way that felt almost reverent. I thought about how I'd carried my daughter into the library some nights when she'd fallen asleep in the car. How I'd written papers in the campus bathroom on my lunch break, propping my phone against the sink. How I borrowed textbooks from the resource center because I couldn't afford my own. I had convinced myself that none of it mattered because no one had said anything. Because no one clapped. But they had seen it. They remembered the details I thought had been swallowed by time. The way I stayed after a group project to help someone struggling with their slide deck. The way I always responded to discussion posts with sincerity, even when it was the end of a 14-hour day. I didn't know it at the time, but I'd been building something slowly, stubbornly, in the background. Not just a degree. A reputation. A character that wasn't loud but was steady. Someone they could count on. Someone who didn't just take up space but added to it. It was jarring in the best way possible. You gave more than you know, Delaney said quietly. And we want you to carry that with you when you walk out of here. Not because we need you to thank us, but because you earned it. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. For once, I let the emotion sit on my face without wiping it away. No mask, no brave front, just truth. They saw what I hadn't. And that realization, strangely enough, made me feel whole again. I drove home slower than usual. Not because of traffic, there wasn't much at that hour, but because every green light felt like a nudge towards something I wasn't ready to face. The sky had gone from gold to a tired gray, the kind that blurred the edges of streetlights and made everything look washed out. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, where the envelope sat like a fragile truth. That card, that check, those words, they were more than tokens. They were evidence that someone, somewhere, had seen me. That today mattered, even if the two people I loved most didn't think so. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the ignition, letting the engine's hum die into a silence that stretched too far. Our porch light was on. The front window glowed with the soft flicker of a TV screen. I took one more breath and stepped out of the car. The house was still. Too still. When I opened the door, the familiar scent of laundry detergent and leftover takeout greeted me, along with the low murmur of a game show playing in the living room. Mira was asleep on the couch, still in her work clothes, dark slacks, a button-up blouse slightly wrinkled from the day. Her head tilted to the side, mouth slightly open, remote resting loosely in her hand. It wasn't her stillness that hurt me. It was the way she looked completely untouched by the day. Unmoved. My eyes drifted to the stairs. Leona's backpack was slumped beside the railing, one of the zippers half open, a book peeking out. No cards. No congrats, Daddy. Sign drawn in bright marker. Just life, unchanged. Like today had never happened. I stood there for a long moment, holding my diploma in one hand, the envelope in the other. Waiting, maybe, for the air to shift. For Mira to stir and gasp, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." For Leona to run down the stairs with something she'd hidden as a surprise. But the air didn't shift. Mira didn't move. Leona didn't come. The TV showed a contestant smiling as they guessed the price of a blender. I set the diploma gently on the dining table and walked into the hallway. The card followed, tucked carefully into the center of the table like a centerpiece I wished they'd notice. The fridge buzzed in the kitchen. The hallway light flickered for a moment, then steadied. I moved through the house in silence, each room more hollow than the last. My shoes felt too loud on the tile, so I slipped them off and carried them to the back room, my room now, ever since Mira had said she needed space. I stood in the mirror of our shared bathroom, still in my gown. Still clinging to a piece of the moment that had belonged to me, however briefly. I looked older tonight, not just from the angle or the lighting, but from the day itself. From the weight of being celebrated by strangers while the people I built this life for simply didn't show up. My hand shook as I undid the zipper. The gown slipped from my shoulders and pooled at my feet. Underneath, I still had on the button-up shirt I wore to the ceremony. It was crisp earlier. Now it looked tired, just like me. I sat on the closed toilet lid, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. And that's when it hit me. The tears didn't come in a rush. They arrived slowly, like reluctant guests, warm and quiet and impossible to ignore. I let them fall. No sobbing, no wailing, just the quiet leaking of everything I'd held in since stepping off that stage. I hadn't expected a parade, but I had expected them. Mira and Leona, their faces in the crowd, their arms waiting for me at the end of that walk. Their voices yelling my name. I had imagined that moment so vividly that now, without it, the day felt incomplete, stolen. I didn't want to be angry, but I was. Not just because they weren't there, but because they hadn't even tried. No text. No call. No, I'm sorry. It was as if my graduation was just another Thursday, just another errand they had no reason to care about. I wiped my face and flushed the toilet just to make noise. Something to break the stillness. When I came out, Mira had shifted in her sleep, her back to me now. Her hair fell over her shoulder, and the blanket we kept on the couch was tangled around her legs. I considered waking her. Standing there in front of the TV and asking the question I'd been choking on all day, why didn't you come? But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. It wasn't that she forgot. It wasn't even that she didn't care. It was that she didn't see it the way I did. She didn't see this degree as survival, as transformation. To her, it was just another thing I was doing. Another reason I came home late or sat up at night typing instead of watching Netflix with her. Another excuse. So instead of waking her, I walked upstairs and checked on Leona. Her bedroom door was ajar. She was asleep, curled on her side, her small fingers wrapped around the edge of her blanket like it anchored her to something better. I stood in the doorway for a long time, the kind of long that makes your chest ache. This degree was supposed to be for them, for her future, for Myra's peace of mind, for the life I swore I could provide. But tonight, standing in the dark hallway of the house I fought to keep, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was supposed to be for me too. I went back downstairs, turned off the TV, and left the diploma on the kitchen counter where the bills usually sat. Maybe tomorrow someone would notice it. Maybe they wouldn't. But tonight, for once, I let myself be proud, quietly, alone, completely. Because even if no one else clapped, I knew what it took to get here. And that had to count for something. The next morning felt like any other. The alarm buzzed at 6:45 a.m., and sunlight spilled through the blinds like it had every day before. Mira was already up, standing in the kitchen in her robe, pouring coffee into the same chipped mug she used every morning. The TV was on, low volume. Leona sat at the dining table munching on dry cereal, swinging her legs, still in her pajamas. It could have been any morning from the last 5 years. Except it wasn't. Because this morning, I had graduated. And no one had said a word. I stood at the edge of the hallway for a moment, holding the doorframe like I needed it to stay upright. My diploma was still on the kitchen counter where I had left it the night before, partially covered now by junk mail and a flyer from a pizza place. Mira didn't look up as I entered. She took a long sip of coffee and scrolled through her phone with her free hand. I waited. Maybe she'd glance up. Maybe there'd be a delayed reaction, a flinch of guilt, a soft smile, even a simple hey. But there was nothing. Just the sound of Leona crunching cereal and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I cleared my throat. Mira glanced up, her expression unreadable. "You want coffee?" she asked. That was it. "No, how was the ceremony?" "No, sorry we missed it. Just caffeine." I walked past her to the counter, picked up my diploma, and brushed off the flyer covering it. The embossed letters shimmered faintly in the morning light. Still proud, still mine. "I graduated yesterday," I said, voice even. Mira gave a small nod and turned back to her phone. "I know. You didn't come." She paused, her fingers hovering over the screen. "I had a rough day at work." The words hit me like a cold slap. Not because of what she said, but how easily she said it. Like we were discussing the weather. Like everything I had worked for, sacrificed for, had been optional background noise in the day she decided was too long to include me in. "The seats I saved for you and Leona were right up front," I said. "I printed your names. I laminated the cards." She sighed. Actually sighed. "Don't guilt me, okay?" I was tired. And honestly, I didn't think it would be a big deal. There it was. The sentence that split something wide open inside me. I didn't think it would be a big deal. I looked at her, really looked, and realized she wasn't being cruel. Not intentionally. She genuinely didn't see it. The long nights, the missed family dinners, the weekends I spent holed up in the library, all of that had never registered as a sacrifice to her. Just something I was doing on the side. Like a hobby. Like collecting stamps or fixing a car. Leona stood up quietly from the table, cereal bowl in hand. She padded over to the sink and placed it inside, then walked over and hugged me around the waist. Tight. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "We forgot." I blinked down at her. She was only 10. Sweet and too smart for her own good. But kids don't forget things like graduations. Not unless no one reminds them. Not unless the people they trust the most show them, directly or indirectly, that it's not worth remembering. "It's okay," I said, patting her back. But it wasn't. Mira poured more coffee. She had homework. And I was going to call, but the day just got away from me. I laughed. Not loudly, not harshly, just a hollow little sound that came from disbelief. "Got away from you," I repeated. "You had weeks." I put the invitations on the fridge. She shrugged. "I don't know what you want me to say." I stared at her and realized something heavy. I didn't want her to say anything anymore. I had waited so long for acknowledgement, for partnership, for her to meet me halfway. But I was always the one adjusting. The one bending. The one carrying the dream while she held the excuses. "I didn't go back to school for me," I said quietly. "Not just for me. I did it because I thought it would give us a better life. Because I thought you'd see me differently. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, I could be someone Leona would be proud of." "You already are," Leona said, still holding on to me. Myra's eyes didn't soften. She just looked tired, like someone who wanted the conversation to end before it began. "I'm sorry you feel hurt," she said flatly, the most non-apology I'd heard in my life. That was it. The conversation we'd never had, because she wasn't capable of having it. Not the way I needed. Not with the weight it deserved. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm just done pretending like it's fine." She didn't respond. Didn't ask what that meant. Maybe she didn't care. Maybe she assumed I'd cool off, fold my pride like I always did, and fall back into place. But this time was different. This time, I had a card full of names that said I mattered. A check from people who believed in my future. A daughter who noticed when her father went uncelebrated it. And a deep, settling truth that this finish line wasn't the end, it was my beginning. I kissed Leona's forehead, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Mira asked, finally lifting her gaze. "Somewhere people notice when I walk in," I said. And I left. I didn't plan on going anywhere specific when I left the house that morning. I just knew I couldn't stay. Not after that conversation. Not after Myra's hollow words and Leona's apology, which hit me harder than any silence ever could. I ended up sitting in my car in the campus parking lot for a while, not thinking so much as existing, letting the world move around me while I figured out what to do next. My phone buzzed just as I was about to head home. It was an email. Short. Simple. Subject: "You're invited." From Professor Delaney. Body: just a quiet dinner with some folks from the department. No speeches, no pressure. 6:30 at Doris Diner. Come if you're free. We'd really like to see you. I stared at it for a moment, unsure. My first instinct was to decline. I didn't want to be a charity case, some stray they'd taken in for the day because my family didn't show. But something in the tone of the email settled me. No pity. No performance. Just an invitation. I showed up 15 minutes early, parked down the street, and sat in my car again, watching the orange glow of the diner's neon sign flicker against the windows. It was the kind of place that had probably looked the same for 40 years, checkered floor tiles, vinyl booths, and a menu that hadn't changed since the Clinton administration. There was something comforting about that. When I walked in, the first face I saw was Bethany's. She was waving from a booth near the back, a half-full coffee cup in front of her. Delaney and Dr. Singh were already seated across from her, each holding laminated menus like they'd been there a dozen times before. "There he is," Delaney said, rising just enough to offer a quick handshake. "Glad you made it." I slid into the booth, still unsure what this was. A reunion? A gesture of goodwill? A last nod of acknowledgement before everyone went back to their own lives? Dr. Singh smiled. "You look less tired today." "That's new." I chuckled. "It's probably the artificial lighting. Makes everything seem softer." Bethany leaned in. "We meant what we wrote in that card. You didn't just finish a degree, you survived something. That's worth recognizing." We ordered food, nothing fancy. Grilled cheese, black coffee, a slice of cherry pie someone insisted I had to try. The conversation drifted from small talk to shared stories. Delaney told us about the time he spilled coffee on a student's thesis and tried to pass it off as accidental aging. Bethany recounted a fire drill that turned into an actual emergency when someone brought a microwave fish lunch. Dr. Singh shared how she once lectured an empty room for 10 minutes before realizing her class had been moved. And then, slowly, the story shifted. Became more personal. Delaney talked about how he almost dropped out of his master's program after his father died. Bethany admitted she hadn't started her career until 35 because she was raising her younger siblings. Dr. Singh revealed she had left an abusive marriage in her 40s to return to school. I didn't know what to say. I'd never imagined these people, so polished, so put together, had carried their own invisible wars. But here they were, laying them out without shame, like offerings at a table I had finally been invited to sit at. "You're not alone," Bethany said after a moment. "You think you are when you're in it, but you're not." I spent so much time thinking I had to prove something, I admitted. Bet if I just finished this degree, my wife would see me differently. That my daughter would think I was worth looking up to. Dr. Singh stirred her coffee, her voice gentle. "And now that you've done it?" I let out a breath. I'm starting to think I was proving it to the wrong people. Silence followed, not awkward, just honest. Delaney set his cup down. "We see you. We always have." Those 4 words did something to me. Something that Myra's absence couldn't undo. Something that made all those nights of studying through exhaustion, of scraping by on microwave meals and 2-hour naps, feel less like suffering and more like a passage. not just to a degree, but to a truth I'd long been denied. I mattered. You ever think about what's next? Dr. Singh asked. You've got the work ethic for more. I looked at her. Like grad school. She smiled. Or something that scares you a little. That's usually where the good stuff is. Bethany pulled something from her bag, a folded pamphlet. Carolina mentioned an education grant. It's competitive, but with your record and your story, I think you have a shot. I took the pamphlet slowly, hands steadier than I expected. I don't know what to say. Then just say you'll think about it, Bethany said. That's enough. We finished our meal with laughter and half-finished plates, like old friends, like people who had come through something together. As we stood to leave, Dr. Singh handed me the check before I could reach for my wallet. It's on us, she said. Call it your graduation dinner. I didn't argue, because for the first time in a long time, I felt full. Not from the food, but from being seen, being heard, and finally being welcomed into a room where I didn't have to shrink to fit. It was 3 weeks after graduation when my phone buzzed, tucked deep in the side pocket of my jeans as I reached for a head of lettuce in the grocery store. I didn't check it right away. Was too focused on the mundane rhythm of life. Apples, bread, milk, rice. The kind of list that never changed, even when your life did. The store was quiet, the kind of still that came with late evening hours. Just a few carts creaking down the aisles, soft pop music playing overhead, and the familiar hum of fluorescent lights. When I finally checked my phone, standing near the frozen pizzas, the message waited on the lock screen like it had been there forever. Mira, sorry about that day. I just didn't think it was a big deal. I read it 3 times. Not because it was complicated, but because it wasn't. That was the whole message. No punctuation. No follow-up. No warmth. Just that. A single-line text that arrived weeks too late and landed with the emotional weight of a shrug. No call. No in-person conversation. Just words thrown over a digital wall like they didn't have to mean anything once they landed. I stood there for a long moment, the freezer door opened beside me, cool air leaking out and frosting the edge of my cart. A woman nearby was comparing 2 brands of orange juice, blissfully unaware of the storm surging behind my ribs. Sorry about that day. That day. Like it was a dentist appointment she forgot to reschedule. Like it wasn't the moment I had dreamed of, worked for, sacrificed for. Like it wasn't the day I had saved 2 seats for my wife and daughter and watched them stay empty while strangers clapped for me. I started to type a response. It was more than just a day. You should have been there. You missed something important. I erased each one. Not because I wasn't angry, I was. But because I suddenly realized I didn't need her to understand anymore. I didn't need Myra's apology to validate what I knew in my bones. That day mattered. I mattered. And she didn't show up. I didn't respond. I just locked the phone, dropped a frozen pizza into the cart, and kept moving. But something inside me shifted as I turned the next corner of the store. For so long, I had measured my worth against her approval. I had chased her attention like it was oxygen. I'd worked 2 jobs, cooked dinners, raised our daughter, and taken on student loans not just for the life I wanted, but for the belief that, one day, she'd look at me and say, I see you. She never did. But Carolina had. Delaney, Bethany, Dr. Singh. People with no obligation to care had reached out anyway. They'd written cards, clapped in small rooms, handed me pamphlets about possibilities I hadn't even dared to dream about yet. And maybe that meant something far more real. By the time I made it to checkout, I had made a decision. I pulled out my phone again, not to text Mira, but to scroll through my emails until I found the one from Carolina. Subject, the grant opportunity we talked about. Let me know if you're ready to apply. No pressure, but I think you'd be great for it. Deadline soon. My thumb hovered over the reply button for only a second. Then I typed, Carolina. I'm ready. Let's talk. D. I hit send before I could overthink it. Because sometimes, the only way to break free from someone else's silence is to speak for yourself. When I got home, Mira was in the kitchen stirring something on the stove. Leona was at the table, working on a math worksheet, her pencil tapping softly against the edge. I set the groceries down without saying much, unpacked them in silence. Mira didn't mention the message. Didn't ask if I'd seen it. I didn't bring it up either. That part of us was done. Later that night, after Leona had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table filling out the first half of the grant application. It asked about background, goals, impact. Normally, I'd agonize over a section like that, wonder what sounded professional, what tone would strike the right chord. But this time, I wrote what was true. I told them I was a warehouse worker, a father, a man who went back to school at 34 and finished at 38 despite every reason not to. I wrote about my daughter and how I wanted her to see education as something worth reaching for. I wrote about quiet victories and what it means when someone claps for you when you've forgotten how to clap for yourself. And when it asked what I would do if I received the funding, I didn't hesitate. I'd keep going. I'd keep building. Because I finally started to believe I'm worth the investment. I hit save and closed the laptop. For the first time in a long time, I felt okay with what came next. Not because it was guaranteed, but because it was mine. No text message, late or otherwise, could take that away. 6 months had passed since graduation, and life had settled into a new rhythm. Not smoother, not louder, just clearer. Mira and I still shared the house, but our conversations had grown sparse, our routines like separate orbits. The silence between us was no longer filled with tension. It was simply a mutual release. There were no fights, no accusations. Just two people slowly drifting in opposite directions, each carrying too much history and too little urgency to fix it. Leona adjusted better than I expected. Kids are resilient that way. She still asked questions, still watched me carefully when I was quiet too long, but she smiled more. Laughed with me again. Sometimes she'd curl up beside me on the couch and ask to watch my favorite old movies, just the two of us. I clung to those moments like life rafts. The application had gone out weeks ago. My statement, my transcripts, the letters of recommendation Carolina and Delaney had offered without hesitation. I didn't tell anyone when I sent it. Not Mira. Not even Leona. I just hit submit and went back to work the next morning like nothing had changed, because for now, nothing had. But deep down, I knew that click meant something. A door creaked open, even if I didn't know yet what lay on the other side. The knock came on a Thursday. It was late afternoon. I was off work early, standing at the kitchen counter slicing fruit for Leona's after-school snack. The knock wasn't urgent. Just 3 light raps against the front door. I wiped my hands, expecting a delivery. Maybe a neighbor. When I opened the door, I froze. Bethany, the librarian. She stood there holding a medium-sized cardboard box with a bright blue ribbon tied and a crooked bow on top. Her curly hair was pulled into a loose bun, and she was grinning in that understated, knowing way she always had. "Got a minute?" she asked. I blinked. Of course. What are you doing here? She stepped inside without waiting for more invitation, setting the box on the coffee table. "Leftovers," she said. "From the staff potluck. We heard the good news." I stared at her, unsure I'd heard correctly. "Wait, good news?" She tilted her head. "You didn't check your email, did you?" I shook my head slowly. Bethany laughed. "Check your email." I fumbled for my phone, heart pounding as I pulled up the inbox. There it was, an unread message, subject line in bold. "Congratulations, Education Advancement Grant Award." My breath caught as I opened it. The first few words blurred. Then I saw it, clear as sunlight through a clean window. "We are thrilled to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of this year's Education Advancement Grant. Your journey, perseverance, and academic excellence represent exactly what this program was designed to support." I read it again. And again. I didn't speak. I just handed the phone to Bethany in case my brain had made the whole thing up. She skimmed it and smiled. "It's real." My knees went weak, and I sat down on the edge of the couch like my legs had given out. I'd been holding on to hope quietly, not wanting to depend on it. But now it bloomed full and unapologetic across my chest. I was going to grad school. Me, 38-year-old father, part-time warehouse shift manager, man who used to type essays on his phone in bathroom stalls during lunch breaks. Bethany opened the box, revealing cookies, a few cards, a small succulent in a ceramic pot, and a folder. We all chipped in. Carolina baked the cookies herself. Don't tell her I said this, but she burned the first batch and had to start over. She chuckled, then pointed to the folder. "There's a list of resources, a few notes of encouragement." "Oh, and this." She pulled out a small card with the words "Keep Growing" written in delicate handwriting. A tiny drawing of a sprout was drawn underneath. I felt tears pressing behind my eyes. Not the painful kind. The grateful kind. "Thank you," I whispered. Bethany sat beside me, her voice quieter now. "You've done more than most would ever try. You didn't just go back to school. You rebuilt yourself, without applause, without help, without shortcuts. This grant isn't a gift. It's recognition. You earned this." I looked at the plan in my hands. Something so small, so alive. It felt like everything this moment was supposed to be. Just then, I noticed movement outside the window. Carolina sat in the passenger seat of a small gray sedan, waving with both hands through the windshield. Delaney sat behind the wheel, honking once and grinning like an uncle who'd just watched his nephew score a winning goal. Seriously? I said, laughing. They came too. Bethany nodded. We told them not to overwhelm you all at once. So they stayed in the car. But they insisted on seeing your face when you read it. I stood, waved back, and mouthed the words thank you through the glass. Carolina gave me a thumbs up. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the belief. The way they had made space for me again and again, until I stopped asking if I belonged. Bethany stood too, gathering her coat. We'll let you breathe. Just wanted to make sure you didn't open that email alone. She headed for the door, then turned. And hey, when you walk across the stage again, we'll be there this time too. Front row. Count on it. I nodded, the lump in my throat too big for words. When the door closed behind her, I sat back down, surrounded by cookies and encouragement and the quiet certainty that something new had begun. I wasn't just someone who had been left behind. I was someone worth returning to.